Iran's mines are strangling global energy supplies, handing Putin $150 million per day in extra oil revenue. Ukraine is preparing to deploy the solution nobody saw coming. NATO-trained mine hunters heading to the Persian Gulf to cut off Putin's windfall. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, this channel is your deep dive source for the military, geopolitical, and economic stories that are reshaping the world. These 4 vessels are about to rewrite who has naval power in the New World Order. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because what I'm about to walk you through is not being covered anywhere else with this level of detail. I mean it nowhere. Hit that subscribe button. The UK and Ukraine are preparing to do something in the Strait of Hormuz that even the United States did not see coming. Something so strategically bold, so unexpectedly clever, that it is not just changing the conversation about the Iran war. It is rewriting the entire playbook for who has naval power in this new world. And right in the middle of all of it, Vladimir Putin is sitting in Moscow absolutely furious because this move, if it goes ahead, is going to hit his war chest directly. So let's break this down from the very beginning. Because to understand why what the UK and Ukraine are about to do is such a big deal, you first need to understand exactly how catastrophic the Strait of Hormuz situation has become for the entire planet. The Strait of Hormuz is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That is it, just 34 kilometers of water separating Iran from Oman. And through that narrow corridor flows 20% of the world's entire oil supply, 20% of global liquefied natural gas, and up to 30% of the world's internationally traded fertilizers. Before February 28, 2066, around 3,000 vessels transited that strait every single month. Right now, that number has collapsed to around 5% of pre-war levels. The International Energy Agency has officially called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Not one of the largest ever, bigger than the 1970s oil shock. And when you look at what that has done to the global economy, the numbers are genuinely alarming. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel in the early weeks of the war. Gas prices in the United States crossed $4 a gallon for the first time in years. Europe's LG prices nearly doubled. Airlines started adding fuel surcharges. Countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Vietnam declared fuel emergencies. Gulf states that rely on the strait for over 80% of their food imports started airlifting basic staples because supermarket shelves were emptying. So that is the scale of what is broken. The question everyone has been asking since day one of this conflict is very simple. Who is going to fix it? And here is where it gets really interesting. Because the answer that nobody expected was not the United States alone. It was not the combined power of the Royal Navy and the French Navy alone. The answer that is now emerging as of this week is Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine, the country that has spent the last 4 years defending itself against a Russian invasion with drones and courage, is now preparing to send its naval vessels thousands of miles away to clear mines from the world's most important energy choke point. And the UK is right there alongside them, making sure it actually happens. Now let's talk about the ships themselves, because I think one of the things that gets lost in the bigger geopolitical picture is the actual capability sitting in Port South right now waiting to be deployed. When I went through the technical details on these 4 vessels, I genuinely understood why analysts at Defense One and naval experts covering this conflict have been so emphatic about Ukraine's potential contribution. These are not small patrol boats. These are purpose-built, NATO'd, sophisticated mine warfare platforms, and together they represent one of the most capable mine countermeasures packages that any country outside of a major naval power could put into the field right now. So let me walk you through what Ukraine actually has. The first 2 ships are the Cherna and the Chessie, formerly known in Royal Navy service as HMS Grimby and HMS Shoreham. Both are Sandown-class single-role mine hunters built by Vasper Thornycraft and commissioned in the early 2000s. They are 52.5 meters long, display 600 tons, and have a draft of just 2.3 meter, which is shallow enough to work effectively in the coastal and semi-enclosed waters you find in the Gulf without losing stability in open ocean conditions. These ships are not fast. Their top speed is 13 knots. But speed is completely irrelevant when your operational posture is to hover almost stationary above something dangerous and neutralize it carefully. And the technology on board is what makes them genuinely formidable. The primary detection system is the Sonar 293 variable depth sonar. What makes this particular sonar so critical for Hormuz's operations is right there in the name, variable depth. The transducer head can be detached from the hull and lowered on a cable to different depths, optimizing acoustic performance based on water temperature gradients and thermoclines. This matters enormously in the Gulf, where shallow, warm water creates complicated sound propagation conditions that a fixed-hull sonar would struggle to deal with. The detachable head solves that problem directly. One of these ships, the Cherna, formerly HMS Shoreham, even has prior Middle East operational experience. Back in 2018, it began a 3-year deployment to the Middle East where it was tasked with securing shipping lanes for merchant vessels. It has been in those waters. It knows those conditions. That is not nothing. The other two ships are the Marupapal and the Matapol, both Almar class, also known as tripartite class, mine hunters donated to Ukraine by the Belgian and Dutch navies. These vessels have a genuinely fascinating Cold War history. The tripartite design emerged from a 1973 agreement between Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, where each country handled a different component of the shared design. France supplied the mine-hunting electronics. Belgium managed electrical systems and navigation. The Netherlands took responsibility for propulsion. The result was around 40 hulls across 3 fleets and one of the rare, genuine examples of multinational shared naval construction from the Cold War era. They measure 51.5 minor, displace around 510 tons standard, and carry comparable mine-hunting and neutralization equipment. All 4 vessels are currently docked in Port South. All 4 crews have completed their NATO interoperability assessments. According to Euromaidan Press, which I checked specifically for this, the Ukrainian Navy confirmed the crews are trained and ready. And to add even more capability, the Netherlands is expected to deliver a 5th vessel to Ukraine in June 2026, which will be commissioned as Henichesk. Ukraine's mine countermeasures fleet is not shrinking, it is growing. Listen, I know this is a lot of ship specs and sonar tech, but stay with me because the second half of this story, the part about what this does to Putin's wallet, that's where it all connects. And if you're still watching, you're exactly the kind of person who should be subscribed to this channel. So go ahead, hit subscribe. You'll thank me later. Now, why does all of this matter specifically for the Hormuz situation? Because the mine threat in that waterway right now is not theoretical. It is documented and actively escalating. On April 10th, the New York Times reported, citing U.S. officials, that Iran was struggling to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, partly because the IRGC itself had lost track of exactly where all of its own mines were laid. Think about that for a moment. Iran laid so many mines so quickly in the early chaos of the war that its own forces cannot fully account for their placement. And then on April 23rd, Axios confirmed something that pushed the situation from serious to genuinely alarming. The IRGC had started actively laying new mines in the strait again. Fresh mine-laying operations confirmed by a U.S. official and a separate source with direct knowledge at a moment when a ceasefire is technically still in place, that prompted President Trump to post on Truth Social on April 23rd, ordering the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any Iranian boat caught laying mines with, in his exact words, no hesitation. He also ordered U.S. mine-sweeping operations to continue at a tripled-up level and confirmed that the USS Chief and the USS Pioneer, 2 U.S. Navy mine countermeasure vessels, were already operating in the strait alongside underwater drones and specialist mine-hunting helicopters. But here's the brutal reality that the Pentagon itself acknowledged. Clearing the mines from the Strait of Hormuz could take up to 6 months. 6 months. And the U.S. Navy has already stretched thin across multiple operational theaters in the region. This is precisely where Ukraine's 4 mine hunters stop being a symbolic gesture and start being a genuine operational necessity. Iran's specific mines are not the old-fashioned contact variety either. Analysts have identified two primary types that the IRGC has deployed. The Mahom 3 uses a combination of acoustic and magnetic sensors to detect vessels and carries a 300-kilo warhead that can be submerged up to 100 meters below the surface. The Mahom 7 is slightly lighter at 220 kilos of warhead designed for shallower water, and critically, it has a conical shape specifically engineered to resist standard sonar detection. Both detonate automatically when their sensors are triggered, no contact required. And according to The Guardian, despite the significant losses Iran's conventional navy suffered in the early strikes of the war, it still retains between 80 and 90% of its small boats and mine-laying vessels. It has the means to keep laying them. It has been laying them, and Trump has now ordered American forces to shoot any boat they catch doing it. The variable depth sonar on Ukraine's Sandown-class ships is specifically configured to hunt mines at depths where the Mahom 3 operates. The detachable sonar head that can be lowered deep into warm, acoustically complex Gulf waters is not a nice-to-have feature in this environment. It is the difference between finding the mine and not finding it. And Italy has now also confirmed it is assembling a package of 4 vessels for the coalition, including 2 minesweepers, an escort vessel, and a logistics ship. According to NBC News and Reuters, Italy's Navy chief said clearly that his country would not be acting alone and that other nations would also send minesweepers. The coalition to clean up Hormuz is forming around Ukraine's commitment. Kyiv moved first. Kyiv declared first, and every other nation that followed is building on the framework that Ukraine established at that April 22nd summit in Northwood. The UK has made sure that the ships are trained and ready. France and the UK jointly declared on April 17th that they would establish an international defensive mission for the Strait once a sustainable ceasefire is in place. Over 36 countries have now signed a joint statement expressing readiness to contribute and condemning Iranian attacks on commercial shipping. But it was Ukraine, a country still fighting for its own survival against Russia, that stood up first and said, "We are ready." That is not just operationally significant, that is historically significant. And the reason why it is historically significant connects directly to the second dimension of this entire story, which is what this move does to Vladimir Putin and to Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, this is the part of the story that I personally spent the most time researching, because when you first hear that Ukraine is sending mine hunters to the Strait of Hormuz, your first instinct might be to ask, what does that have to do with the war in Ukraine? What does a mine-clearing operation thousands of miles from the front lines have to do with Russian tanks in Eastern Europe? The answer, once you trace it through carefully, is everything, and I want to walk you through exactly why. Vladimir Putin woke up to this news and felt it like a punch directly to his treasury. Let me start with where Russia was economically at the beginning of 2026, because the context here is crucial. By February 2026, Russia's war economy was genuinely starting to buckle under the combined pressure of Western sanctions, Ukrainian drone strikes on energy infrastructure, and the tightening G7 price cap on Russian oil. The International Energy Agency data shows Russia's oil and petroleum export revenues had fallen to just $9.5 billion, the lowest since the full-scale invasion began. Export volumes dropped to 6.6 million barrels per day. Ukrainian strikes on Baltic ports had cut physical exports by as much as 40%, according to Reuters. GDP was contracting. Bankruptcies were up 31% in 2025 to 568,000 cases, according to official Russian data. And according to Chatham House's analysis published April 10th, Putin was approaching a moment where he might be forced into real concessions in Ukraine simply because the economy could no longer sustain the war. And then on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched their war against Iran, and everything changed for Putin overnight. Iran's closure of the strait triggered the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global market. Brent crude surged past $100, then pushed toward $120. The Financial Times calculated Russia was earning an extra $150 million per day purely from the price spike. A senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, Sergei Vakowenko, told CNBC that Russia's total windfall ran into the billions within weeks. The Kyiv Post, citing Financial Times calculations, confirmed Moscow received between 1.3 and 1.9 billion in additional export tax revenues in the first 2 weeks alone. Russian crude that had been selling at a discount was suddenly trading at a premium to Brent in some markets. Countries that had been cutting Russian purchases were suddenly scrambling for whatever they could get. Chatham House described it plainly as an economic gift for Putin. Now hold that number in your head, $150 million per day. Every day the strait stays closed. Every day those mines sit in the water. Putin's treasury fills up by an additional $150 million going directly into funding the war in Ukraine. Every week of closure is over $1 billion of extra capacity for Russia's war machine. That is the direct financial link between the mines in the strait and the soldiers dying on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. It is not abstract. It is a direct cash pipeline from Iran's mine-laying strategy to Putin's ability to keep fighting. Ukraine understands this completely. Ukraine had been winning a nutritional economic battle against Russia's energy infrastructure through drone strikes on Baltic ports and Black Sea facilities. The Hormuz closure wiped out much of that work overnight by making Russia's remaining exports far more profitable, sending mine hunters to clear Hormuz. Is Ukraine continuing the exact same strategy, just on a global stage? When those mines are cleared, shipping resumes, supply increases, prices fall, and Russia loses its windfall. The math is as simple as it is devastating for Moscow. But there is a second dimension more significant in the long run. Turkey Key's invocation of the Montreux Convention means Ukraine cannot send naval vessels into the Black Sea. Russia devastated Ukraine's conventional fleet early in the war. Ukraine rebuilt through unmanned vessels and drone warfare, forcing Russia's Black Sea fleet to retreat from Crimea without traditional warships. But Montreux still technically capped Ukraine's traditional naval projection. Now Ukraine is sending mine hunters to the Persian Gulf, coordinating with the Royal Navy, operating alongside French and Italian vessels, building 10-year defense partnerships with Gulf Arab states that Zelensky himself confirmed include Ukrainian sea drones. Putin invaded, expecting to neutralize a regional power in days. Instead, he created something he never anticipated, a combat-hardened, globally connected force that can now project capability into the Persian Gulf without needing the Black Sea at all. Ukraine's commitment here is also about something larger than immediate military and economic calculus. For years, Ukraine was seen primarily as an aid recipient. What is happening now is a fundamental transformation of that identity. Ukraine is becoming a genuine defense and security partner that other nations want on their side, with direct consequences for every security guarantee, weapons deal, and economic partnership it negotiates from this point forward. The deployment is ready. The crews are trained. The ships are prepared. The coalition is forming. The only thing standing between those 4 vessels in Port South and the Strait of Hormuz is the political and military situation in the Middle East. And right now that situation is sitting on a knife edge. Both the UK and France have been explicit. Neither is willing to send ships into the strait while meaningful probability of war resumption remains. The ceasefire brokered by Pakistan on April 8th is technically still in place. But Axios confirmed on April 23rd, citing a U.S. official, that the IRGC had started laying fresh mines again. U.S. forces have redirected 38 ships since the blockade began April 13th. 3 aircraft carriers are positioned simultaneously in the region for the first time since 2003. Israel's defense minister stated publicly on April 23rd that Israel is prepared to renew the war and waiting only for Washington's green light. This is not a ceasefire. It is a heavily armed pause. Peace talks are not providing reassurance. Islamabad Round 1 lasted 21 hours with no agreement. Round 2 was canceled when Trump cited infighting in Thrawn. Iran's latest proposal attempts to decouple Hormuz from the nuclear question. Trump has indicated that is almost certainly not enough. The core American demand remains a permanent, verifiable end to Iranian enrichment. No faction in Iran's fractured leadership has publicly agreed to that. Until they do, the strait stays closed and Ukraine's mine hunters stay in Port South. But the moment a real ceasefire clicks into place, the sequence moves fast. The mission was planned at the April 22nd Northwood Summit, with 30 nations contributing. Ukraine's role is already mapped. Defense One noted specifically that the detachable sonar systems on Ukraine's Sandown-class vessels are configured for the exact acoustic conditions of the Gulf's warm, shallow, thermocline heavy waters. Intelligence on mine locations has been built by U.S. underwater drones and satellite surveillance for weeks. These ships are not going to improvise, they are going to execute. When shipping resumes, oil prices fall, the energy crisis begins to decompress, and Russia's $150 million daily windfall starts evaporating. Chatham House's analysis suggests sustained price decline could push oil toward $50 a barrel over the longer term at precisely the moment Russia faces production constraints, sanctions pressure, and export limitations. Chatham House called that scenario potentially devastating for Russia's budget in the medium term. Ukraine reopening Hormuz does not just inconvenience Putin. It strikes at the financial foundation of his ability to keep fighting. What we are watching across the Hormuz crisis, Ukraine's deployment, and the coalition forming in Northwood, Paris, Rome, and the Gulf capitals is the emergence of a genuinely new global security architecture, one nobody designed in advance. Forced into existence by the collision of multiple simultaneous crises, Putin's entire strategic framework depends on NATO division, American distraction, European slowness. What he did not plan for was Ukraine becoming a global naval partner, Ukrainian sailors training in Port South to deploy to the Persian Gulf, Zelensky signing 10-year defense agreements with Gulf states that include Ukrainian sea drones. None of that was in his calculation when he launched what he called a special military operation in February 2022, expecting it to last a few days. Ukraine is turning that miscalculation into a global strategic asset, one mine hunter deployment at a time. And when those 4 ships finally leave Portsmouth and head south through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea, into the Gulf of Oman, they will be carrying something more important than sonar equipment and mine disposal vehicles. They will be carrying proof that a country that was supposed to have been broken 4 years ago is now operating on the world stage in ways that even its closest allies did not fully anticipate. That is the story underneath the story. That is why even the United States could not quite believe what the UK and Ukraine were preparing to do, because it is not just a mind-clearing mission. It is a statement about who Ukraine is becoming, what the UK's commitment to its partners actually looks like in practice, and why the old assumptions about who has power in this new world are being rewritten in real time. If you made it this far, you're serious about understanding this crisis. And honestly, I want to hear what you think. Drop a comment. Do you believe Ukraine's mine hunters will actually make it to Hormuz, or is this all just posturing? And when those ships do deploy, how fast does Putin's $150 million daily windfall collapse? Tell me what you think. I read every comment.